Hey YouTube, this is Tom with TK.Designs. Welcome to my last video for 2023. This video I'll walk you through the steps of completing a woven style charcuterie board. Follow along with me to create a wonderful project. In this first clip I was cutting thin strips which will be used later in the project. I'll talk to you more about that when we get to it. Off camera I prepared the board made of walnut and sacrificial board that will be woven in out of purple heart, yellow heart, and cherry wood. I start by attaching the sacrificial piece to the walnut board, approximately where I would like the weave pattern to exist in the final project. I use the tried and true painter's tape and CA glue method to attach the sacrificial board to the top of the main board. Next, I draw a random wavy line that I want to follow to cut along on the bandsaw. I take the board to the bandsaw where I'll cut as close to the pattern as I can. As you can see in this first cut, I had some difficulty. I had a 14 TPI blade in the bandsaw and it had a very rough time cutting through the material. For subsequent cuts in the video, I replaced the blade with a 6 TPI blade, leading to a much improved cut. Next, I remove the top pieces that I cut. The top piece will be glued to the corresponding bottom piece. Did you know that approximately 90% of my viewers are not subscribed to the channel? If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe as it encourages me to keep producing videos. Remember the thin strips I was cutting at the beginning of the video? Those strips are used between the glued pieces to account for the thickness or kerf of the saw blade when I made the cuts. It's going to provide a little contrast in color and a smoother glue seam. I try to make sure that I line up everything so that we have a tight seam on the glue up and no gaps in the board pieces. I clamp everything tight so that the glue joining can be solid. I let this dry overnight before removing the clamps. I'll clean up the glue and inspect the joint one last time to make sure that everything is lined up correctly. After the glue is dried, I remove the excess thin strip material using a small chisel. I'll flip the board over and remove the excess glue as well. Next, I run the board through the drum sander to flatten everything down and prepare for the next round of cuts and glue-ups. As before, I attach the sacrificial board to the top of the board and line it up where I want to cut. Next, we'll cut and assemble as we did the first time. I repeat this process several more times off camera so as to reduce the amount of repetitive processes. The last set of cuts and glue-ups I did slightly differently. This time I made 2 cuts so that I could take the middle part of the sacrificial board and glue it between the 2 bottom sections of the main board. After the final glue up, I run it through the drum sander one more round to clean up the top and the bottom. Next, I'll square up the ends of the board on the table saw. Now we move over to the CNC to cut the handle and around the corners. You can do this with a jigsaw and sander if you don't have a CNC. Next, we're going to do a lot of standing. I start with 120 grit because I have 80 grit on the drum sander already. I'll move up to 220 grit after after we pop the grain. In between 120 grit rounds, I pop the grain with water. This is going to make the board retain its smoothness in the future when it becomes wet. We pop it, we sand it, and that prevents the board from having grains stand up on edge when the board gets wet. Following the popping of the board, I'll do several rounds more of sanding with 120 grit and move on to 220 grit sanding. Next, I burn my brand into the board. The next to final step is to oil the board with food-safe mineral oil. This really makes the colors come out in the board and let that beautiful edge grain shine. Finally, I'll use some board butter to seal the wood, making it ready for use. I apply the butter, let it sit for a couple of hours, and then buff it off. We'll finish the video out with some close-ups of the final board along with some still pictures. I want to thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please remember to like, subscribe, and comment. I like to respond to comments as quickly as possible, and I try to respond to all comments, good, bad, or indifferent. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.